Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Voice of Authority, brought to you by Carter Jonas and GLE and Haptic Architects and London Square Partners. My name is Toby Fox. I'm the Managing Director at 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. And our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. And we'll be connecting you again on Thursday, the 20th of October at midday, when we welcome Style Homes and their special guests to a panel discussion titled Thinking Small for Big Results, Offsite Manufacture and Community Developers. And details for that are going to go into the chat momentarily so that you can register. But back to today and Ask the Voice of Authority, our regular interview with a public sector leader, which we hope gives our network a deeper understanding of the vision for a place and how it will grow and evolve by hearing from the people shaping that vision and what makes them tick. And by the way, you can find an archive of hundreds of written and recorded interviews at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. Now, the format for our live interviews is simple. We ask the Voice of Authority 7 questions. The first 3 cover their wish list and the challenges they must overcome to deliver that list and the partners that they're seeking to help them. And then we'll ask our Voice of Authority what constitutes good development and who or what has shaped their views on growth and the watershed moments in their life and career that have led them to our screens today. And finally, we'll ask what they get up to outside of work. What are the interests and passions that drive and motivate them and perhaps shape those views and ambitions? And for the last fortnight, we've been inviting questions from viewers through Twitter and LinkedIn, and we'll be inviting a couple of viewers on the screens to put their questions to our Voice of Authority during the session today. And we're delighted that today, those questions will be put to the leader of the Royal Borough of Greenwich, Councillor Anthony Okereke. Now then, Labour won a thumping majority in Greenwich in May's local elections, but the contest for leadership was tight. Councillor Okereke prevailed, with his stated priorities being responding to the cost of living crisis head-on with new support schemes, working closely with the NHS to tackle health inequalities, and addressing climate emergency to ensure that our borough is in the best shape it can be for future generations. How does that shape and define the council's housing and development ambitions? Can the council meet its aim of getting 1,750 new homes on site this year through its Greenwich Builds programme? And what form will a promised new strategy for public realm take? And how will Councillor Okereke's intentions to increase developer contributions affect new schemes such as Woolwich Exchange and investor appetite for further growth in the borough? We're going to spend the next hour answering those questions and more. So let's start by asking Councillor Okereke. Anthony, what 3 things are at the top of your wish list for Greenwich?
Hey, Toby. First of all, thanks for having me. And it's great to come and speak to you today. In terms of the wish list, I think coming in part of my personal wish list, one is to influence the labour market as much as possible in Greenwich and help deliver almost a variety of jobs. We want to see more jobs come forward in this area, and development and growth is key to that. Development helps provide great employment space that can see that variety of jobs that I speak about. Another thing is more affordable housing. That's really important to me. We want to see more London affordable rent come through, more social housing as part of schemes. We're delivering 1,750 homes ourselves, and we've got a housing waiting list of 28,000. So there's never enough affordable or social housing in the borough. So we really want to focus on how we enable more and unlock more affordable housing. And lastly, I think one that's really important for me is about good placemaking. Creating place is really difficult. I think, it takes a lot of investment, it takes a lot of partners, it takes time. And when I say place, there's also needs to be a focus on infrastructure as well. How we make sure we get good place and good infrastructure. We see and we know that there is a direct link from good growth, good development to health, the health and well-being of residents. And under my leadership, one thing I want to focus on is how we help encourage and enable the health of our residents, the health and well-being of our residents. And development is key to that, because if we can create good place, we can encourage people to walk, to cycle, to get out from their homes. And I think for me, good placemaking is at the core of something that we want to see in Greenwich. We don't want crap.
No crap in Greenwich. Thanks very much, Anthony. Can you tell us a bit about that Greenwich Builds programme, about those 1,750 new homes that you're building yourself? How confident are you of meeting that target?
So with the 750, about all sites except for one have planning. Number one, we have a programme that we're going through where we have to have submitted planning, got planning by them by a certain date, as well as shovel in the ground by a certain date as well. Obviously, we get funding from the Mayor of London, and that funding is tied to a certain date. We're on track to deliver. Obviously, there are challenges there. One, by virtue of the fact that we're doing modular housing, so sometimes there are going to be almost delays by the virtue of everyone trying to do modular housing at the moment. So we found that particularly challenging. Build costs, that's been hard. A lot of inflation is really making some of our schemes rocket. We're hoping to not vary from the timeline. We do want to deliver as quickly as possible and make sure that we meet the Mayor's timelines. So I don't envision us shifting from that at the moment. I think it's about how we get more funding around schemes. And for sometimes there may be an opportunity where we may have to go back to the GLA and say, look, this might be unaffordable. Are you willing to give us more grant funding for a particular scheme? But those conversations are had and we are aware of those schemes. So at the moment, I'm hoping that we're not diverting from the current timeline. We can't afford not to deliver those homes.
We'll probably come back to some of those challenges in the next section of the interview, Anthony, but I just want to go back to what you said about the labour market, about your attempts to attract new jobs and a variety of jobs to the borough. What levers, what powers do you have as a local authority to make that happen?
So one, for our local plan, we're going to be focusing on delivering a new local plan. That's a great opportunity to have a discussion about land, employment space, and also form partnerships around those who come in to have to promote their sites. So I think there's areas there that we can have a conversation about. Ultimately, we have the power to convene and work with partners and bring people together to forge a consensus around a vision for an area. As well as doing that, you know, I love the fact that sometimes I can take my gloves off and say, why don't you reach out to this company and see if there's anything we can do to get them to come to Greenwich. You know, we have to take that approach about thinking about who we want in the borough. Like I said, creating place is difficult, but you really have to be quite prescriptive with it. So I think through our local plan, the focus on delivery of employment space can be key.
Who would you most like to invite to the borough then? If you take your gloves off and you issue those invitations, who's top of your list?
I would love to see more jobs around science, labs, and more life sciences and all those kind of areas. Real different type of employment that we may not have in Greenwich at the moment. Love to see us increase our digital jobs in the area as well. That would be great to have that in the area. At the moment, at the top of our labour market is mainly more of the care sector, which is great, and we want to keep building on that, but we want to see more variety in our labour market.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anthony. Okay, we're going to come back to the rest of your wish list later on, because you talked about good placemaking, and I want to ask you about what you see as good placemaking and good development later. But let's dig into the challenges first. So you talked a bit about your own schemes that you're bringing forward and the difficulties you're having with inflation and materials scarcity and funding and so on. So how big a challenge is the current economic environment to your development and regeneration goals and housing goals for the borough?
Oh, it's huge. Obviously, you have council housing delivery, you have registered provider delivery, you have a developer private market delivery, and all of us are facing challenges. So, for instance, fire safety, you know, we're having to spend a lot of money making sure that we can meet, quite rightly so, meet new legislation targets, as well as we bringing things up to standard. And you know, that slows, without additional funding from government, money that we could be using to build houses, obviously focuses on our housing capital program, number one. Number two, the costs of the build costs, the fact that inflation is increasing everything. It makes a lot of schemes now at what we costed them potentially more unviable. And that's difficult for us because obviously we build within our HRA account. There's additional things, labour and market build costs that we see private development suffering on. Big danger there is people come back into us and say, actually, we can't afford to deliver that much affordable housing anymore. So there's a threat there as well. And then you see the economic status of what's going on with mortgages and the fact that many people might not be able to buy a house, Help to Buy coming to an end. Actually, is there a knock-on effect with the amount of, as a result of maybe a lack of sale that will happen? Will that have a knock-on effect on delivery? So all of those things are quite risky for us, and we're always in conversations with our partners to understand what are the challenges they face, and it's honestly shared challenges across the board, absolutely shared challenges across the board.
So when you say shared, it's got to be a question of when rather than if a developer comes to you and says, look, I know we agreed that we could put 40% affordable into this scheme, but we just can't do it anymore. What's your response? I say, and I realize it's going to be case by case, but what's your sort of overall kind of response?
I mean, first of all, I've not had that yet, which is great. So people are still delivering. I do know some developments in other areas have ground to a halt. Number one, that's quite scary. Number two, I think at the moment we have just part of our house building program is about buying sites of people. So if there is that potential discussion, that's great, because actually I want to deliver homes. I think when I came on this show last time, I talked about the difficulty that local authorities have in competing in the private market when it comes to buying land. So the discussion for me would be about, is there any units we could take off them themselves? You would have seen the news recently about us buying circa 265 plus homes from Lovell as a result of the partnership that we have from them already, which goes into our 1,000 home commitment.
Great stuff. And in terms of your own build program, is there a price at which it's just too expensive to build, or can you look at the kind of social costs, that the health implications that you mentioned earlier of not building those houses, and say, well, if you add all of those up, if you monetize all of that, it outweighs the increasing build costs?
That's a really difficult one, because there's such uncertainty. So obviously when we build inside our HRA, obviously you would have seen the fact that there's going to be a potential rent cap coming. That changes absolutely everything from our budgets. What we previously budgeted, we may not be able to deliver on. So I think there is that risk there. At the moment, we've modeled from about 3%, 5%, and 7% rent caps and see what that is. At 7%, we just about break even. So one thing is in the consultation to government on rent caps, we're saying 7% looks like the more sensible kind of area, yet to be agreed, obviously, and we're yet to see what the government is doing. But ultimately, we are kind of making sure that our fingers are on the pulse to see what issues are coming up, for instance, like rent caps, like schemes that might be unviable, and having that discussion with the JLA and national government and sharing what those issues are, but also trying to be innovative in saying, what more can we do? How do we leverage some of the ideas that others are doing, like working with our Community Benefit Society, Meridian Home Start? Is it thinking about how we build outside of the HRA? These are a variety of things that we have to consider. What can we do with regeneration, and what other partners can we look at? So these threats are there. It's about thinking innovatively about how we overcome them.
Anthony, thank you. That's really fascinating answer and really helpful. Now, there's another aspect of what's happening at the moment with inflation and the sort of economic turbulence, and that's our ability to respond to the climate emergency and build in the sort of carbon premium to make sure that development is sustainable. And I want to invite a viewer onto the screen, James Harris, who's an old colleague of yours, I think an old friend of yours. He's currently communications manager at Communications Potential. James, come and join us on the screen to put your question to Anthony.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. What's your question?
Anthony, good to see you.
Likewise.
How can sustainable development be realised, I guess, en masse, when the cost of energy efficient and sustainable features, air source heat pumps, etc., are still so expensive for developers? Do you think national or local government should have a role in sort of reducing this cost, or should the responsibility be on developers?
Thank you. That's a good question. So number one, we're currently delivering zero carbon homes ourselves. So I think councils are beginning to demonstrate that it can be done. I do want to see more support from government in this area by virtue of grant funding to see how we can get more parity in sustainability and what's on offer for development. So number one, how can I make sure that we have a product that works in a big scheme for a whole area? That's number one. Number two, we need to understand there's such a variety of options between air source heat pumps and stuff and different narratives. And I think if the government changed the building regulations, it will help accelerate the need for more understanding and technology and innovation in this area, which means the industry would begin to move forward as well with more focus from people, which will make it easier, and the knock-on effect will be more standardized across developments. Councils are already taking that lead, so I do think that we do need a change in the building regs to help accelerate development in this area. On the cost-wise, is it just the barriers of cost? I don't think it totally is just the barriers of cost, number one, but there should be something there to help incentivize, because I think it works, and we need to think about, if we're trying to create a sustainable future, that investment has to be done now, and government needs to be more open to the ideas of doing that, and that's why we're building zero carbon homes. That's number three. And lastly, I think there is something there about user experience, and that's why I talk about the acceleration of government focusing on how they accelerate policy in this area, because we need to understand what user experience is with sustainable tools that in comparison to a gas boiler, which people are much more au fait with or able to use. And actually, how do we get the user experience to be quite simplified? If you go around to different properties, you see some people's energy bills are quite low versus some people's energies are quite high, because their experience with this technology isn't that easy. They don't know how to use it sometimes. And also, when it loses warranty, who takes cover for it? How easy is it to repair? So I think there's a whole cross-cutting issues that needs to be challenged. We've been able to do it cost-wise, so I do think developers might be able to do it cost-wise, but I do want to see more incentives from government, and that starts with a policy change and more grant funding for councils to do it.
And what about, sorry, James, just to cut in, what about the council's role in that user experience, you say? Because you've got a great role in leading local communities. So what role can you play in helping, because the big challenge here is that people have to change their lifestyles, right? They're going to have to do stuff that is a bit uncomfortable. So what role can you play in helping them do that?
One thing we're doing is trying to focus on lessons learned. How are our tenants using these how are they using this technology? What is their experience in using this technology, number one? So it's almost being able to track that and have conversations with them and check in with them. So after a year and living in a development, what's their experience been? Like I said, I went into a home where one woman was talking about her energy bills costing £30 a month, and another person's costing 100 and something pound a month. And obviously there's different levels of energy use there, but there should be some parity. We're saying that these means are going to be sustainable. It's number one. Number two, I know Birmingham Council is doing a project at the moment with universities tracking different user experiences with like air source, different areas connected to air source heat pumps. And I thought maybe there is an opportunity for councils to do more research and development with universities about how we use this technology, how we live with it, and how we manage it. So there's more stuff that needs to be there, but I think we can innovate locally The difficulty with the pressures we face is so hard to take on these research and development projects sometimes. But we are focused on using almost lessons learned and understanding about how our residents interact with these types of technologies. But I do want to see government policy really accelerate in this period in the same way they've done with cars, with the car industry.
Yeah, fantastic, Anthony. Thanks. James, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks a lot.
What's your interest, James, in that subject?
Well, I mean, we deal with lots of residents, lots of councillors and developers as well, who I think a lot of it is about sort of, well, as Anthony said, talking about lessons learned and I guess sharing information with those stakeholders and really, I guess, describing how these things can improve not just your energy efficiency and maybe your bills in the long term, but actually, I guess, improve well, the overall experience for example, your heating or sort of just your quality of life in general.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed, James. Thanks for joining us. And thanks for putting your question to the voice of authority, Anthony Okereke, the leader at Greenwich Council. Anthony, that talk of the sort of developer ask, what you want from the private sector in this picture, leads me on to the next section of the interview, which is to talk to you about partners and the sorts of partners that you're looking to cultivate in helping you develop your aims and the sorts of values you want to share in those partnerships. And I want to ask first in that, you spent time at Chess, I think, and Planning Potential as a planning consultant. So how does that inform you on how to get the best out of your partners, and how will your intentions to increase developer contributions affect the appetite for development in Greenwich?
Right, so I'll just say I worked mainly more on consultation. I'm still getting up my technical expertise through my masters, which I hope to finish once I've done being leader and all that kind of stuff. Number one, I think it's first understanding the values and aims of what that council is trying to achieve. That's really key. What is it they're saying in all of their documents about what their aim is, and really aligning to that. Two, for Greenwich per se, like I mentioned, I'm really committed to people who are invested in good placemaking. It's about the wider picture for me. How does one development connect to the overall vision of what we're trying to do in Woolwich in terms of a nighttime economy? That's really key. So actually, as in what you're doing, how does it fit into the wider vision? And consultation. I want to see us taking consultation to the doorsteps of people. I think that's how you get true voices. We often complain about the voices in development, and the lack of voices we see in the development process is as a result of us not counteracting the barriers that stop people from engaging. And therefore, to counteract those barriers, we have to take consultation to the doors of people. We've recently had a partnership with the Hill Group. They've been really good in understanding what we're trying to deliver in Woolwich. So they've partnered with us on our leisure centre and the development scheme as a result of that, circa 400 plus homes. The consultation was absolutely fantastic. It was multifaceted. They went and had individual meetings with community groups to understand their challenges and how they overcome it, as well as being grounded in the vision of what we're trying to do in Woolwich. And I think those mix is a really important thing. If you look at the development itself, it's got a fantastic little square in the middle that talks of, it almost has a story to it. It talks about how we use that place, how the community living is going to interact with it, how there could be performances in that little square and a range of associated things. So it isn't just about housing. It talks about actually how we live our lives around this space and how it ties together to development. And I think that good placemaking has a story to it. It has where it wants to go. It has what it's trying to achieve. And that's what we really want to see from our partners. We don't want people who's just going to, I recognize that people are going to build and go, but at the same time, I want people who are going to be invested in what they're building for people.
do you really still get developers coming to you with and bringing schemes forward and going through a process and not engaging with community groups in any way? Does that really still happen?
Sometimes, sometimes it's people. I think I think as councils, we need to be able to do our role. That's number one. Because I'm not going to pretend now on the local authority level if it's perfect. We need to be able to do our role, and developers also need to be able to do their role. With us, it's been really clear in what our expectations are. And sometimes where the council may not have been clear, people get frustrated, and therefore you can see that come about. And number two, we do have people who are who say, look, this is what we're offering, take it or leave it. That still does happen today, till today. We see some people who do focus on, viability-led schemes. It's the nature of development, and obviously we're going to keep maintaining our clarity in what we're trying to deliver and what we're trying to do for Greenwich. It's have a variety of housing, have a mixed economy, good employment space, and more importantly, creating little hubs of activity that offer leisure, culture, transport, and housing and employment.
Great stuff. We're going to come back to that theme again in the next section. But before we do, let's invite a second viewer to the screen to put his question to you. We've got an old friend of Ask the Voice of Authority, Peter Evesden, MBE, who's the chair of the London Forum of Amenity and Civic Societies, who wants to talk to you a little bit to continue the theme that we've already begun around community engagement. Peter, welcome back, I should say. Yes. What's your question for Councillor Okereke?
Thank you very much. Yes, the question is really about community engagement, but first of all, I'd like to thank him very much for what he said about air source heat pumps and some of this other technology. It is so expensive. I have heard that other boroughs are using ground source heat pumps to create district heating. I don't know whether that will figure in your plans, but my point is about community engagement. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill was quite encouraging because it had more about people getting involved. I don't know whether you're aware, but the Westminster City Council has produced a guide and a standard for developers, which says if you cannot prove that you have engaged people all the way through the pre-application process, and you have dealt with their issues as raised, and you can demonstrate that you have, then we will not even lodge your application as having been formally received until you have done that. Would you go that far? And how would you deal with these developers which have this take it or leave it attitude you described?
Thank you, Peter, for your question. So first of all, I think I have heard of it, and I also believe Southwark Council has that approach as well through their developers charter. We are actually currently looking at our statement of community involvement and how we do consultation and how we want developers to do consultation. There is going to be a focus of that early engagement. There is going to be a focus on teasing out how you have responded to the concerns of people. And I think we will be looking at bringing forward a charter in that sense, which would require people to submit that and make sure they've fully qualified it for it to be validated. That's still ongoing at the moment, that work. So it hasn't been developed yet, but we are kind of looking more towards the developers charter on how we want people to consult. Like I said before, we want people to take consultations to people's doorsteps. So we want to see best practice. We want to see door knocking. We want to see leafleting. We want to see websites. We want to see online consultations and sometimes traditional public exhibitions, which can help sometimes. But a mixture of all of those things helps give a well-rounded consultation. But we do want to be more prescriptive than that. I don't want to commit now and say we're going to do exactly that, because I need to work out the implications in terms of we can't stop anyone from submitting an application. That's number one, and we have to decide it with a number of certain weeks. But I think there is something to be done about actually, through setting an example of good consultation. If you meet that, then we want to reward developers for doing that. So I think there's something to be done there. But I'll have a look at the Westminster one.
Thanks, Anthony. Peter, does that answer your question?
Yes, it's very encouraging indeed. I think the communities that we represent across London, and Anthony will know the ones in his borough, they are a little concerned about the secrecy of the pre-application discussions that happen between a case officer and a developer, because they feel that by the time the application is lodged, the developer feels, well, I've paid money and I've had advice, and if the application is not right, then it's the case officer's fault. But the community is not really aware of a lot of that dialogue that has happened.
Can I come back on that one? Because
by all means, Anthony, yeah.
I think the pre-app process is a really important, the reason for the secrecy is important because obviously we don't want to alert people to something that could never happen. So it's almost the first discussion between the council and the developer, where they come in and say, well, what do you almost feel about this? And we give feedback. And sometimes sometimes what they come on with might not ever get done. It might not ever be what is submitted. And therefore, sometimes we don't want to alert people or cause anxiousness and worry about a specific plan. And that's why that process is almost like that. It's for that two-way honest dialogue. I do think there is things to be done. I don't think that secrecy stops consultation and stops developers from still having discussions with communities and saying, hey, we're looking at building in this area. What's your thoughts? This is a roundabout way of what we're trying to achieve vision-wise. How can you engage with that? So there's an equilibrium and balance to be struck, noting the fact that people are very passionate about development. People are very passionate about stopping development. Very rarely do I see people passionate about unlocking development. And therefore, there is almost a healthy tension that needs to be kept, and sometimes a bit of fairness in that. And that's the reason why that system's like that. I don't think we're proposing to change that in Greenwich, but I do think we still can have discussions with communities about what we're trying to achieve in a particular area, because my job is to unlock development, and that's what I want to do.
Fantastic, Anthony. Thanks very much. And I just need to move the conversation on a little bit now. So thank you very much indeed, Peter, for putting your question to our voice of authority today. And I want to continue this theme slightly before we wrap up on partnerships. I've got a panel discussion on Thursday around community-led development, so community land trusts and the like. And what's your views on their capacity to unlock development, as you said, Anthony?
I mean, listen, I'm a huge supporter of community-led development. So in Greenwich, we have 2 sites that have been allocated for community-led housing. In fact, when I came in 2018, that was the one thing that I wanted to achieve. So in our housing delivery 2018 proposals, we have 2 sites allocated. We've just gone through a tendering process, and a community group has won it, Greenwich Citizen Housing, which is in partnership with London CLT. They're looking to submit a planning application next year. We've done it in the space of 4 to 3 years. That's absolutely amazing and unheard of. With political will, with good communities who have the right support from established organisations from London CLT, community-led housing can be delivered. We just need the political will. You need the political will, you need the foundations in the community of focus groups who are willing to do the work, of which we had, and a good partnership with someone like a London CLT or a Ross or a GCDA.
London CLT will be on this panel on Thursday. So viewers, if you're interested,
make sure you get them to talk about the work we did in Greenwich, because it's exemplary. It's really, really great work. You know, to see community-led housing be delivered policy-wise, and now to a tendering stage in the space of 3 years, is unheard of.
Well, I'm going to continue this theme in our next section of the interview, Anthony, because I want to talk to you about exactly that. What do you see as good development? What do you kind of point at and say, I'm really proud of being part of that, or that's what we want more of in Greenwich?
So I think number one, I want to get everyone caring about their environments. That's really important to me. So good development encourages, as it's coming forward, it encourages dialogue. That's important so that people can have an understanding of their space and the area that they live in. But it also enables us to have great lives. It enables us to have good health. You know, when I go to areas like Kidbrooke, really high dense area, but ultimately surrounded by this beautiful play space, this absolutely beautiful play space, and absolutely lovely natural environments with water flowing through and everything that gets people out going on walks, gets people out playing, gets people out of the house, engaging with each other and engaging with their neighbors. We have to find a way of balancing our need for housing alongside our need for environment. I think that there has a good mix of that, number one. Another good place that I like is, I love Town. I don't know if you heard of Town. They did Marmalade Lane in Cambridge. Absolutely love that. You know, street designed by this almost houses designed around this street that is almost multi-purpose, that gets kids out doing different things on there, growing things. We have to think about how development, number one, houses people, but outside of development, when people leave their homes, how it enables them to interact with what's around them. For me, good placemaking also helps reduce the car driving, you know, helps walk to places. It makes you want to stay in your area. We know more people are working from home. Actually, how do you make sure that they feel that they want to go outside or not rush into their homes? So it's about making sure that it promotes the health and well-being of people.
So for viewers' benefit, you were referring to the developer called Town, TOWN, which is headed up by Johnny Anstead and co, who were part of an event we ran recently called Site Match, and yeah, terrific developers. Kidbrooke, you mentioned. I just want to dig into that. If you were to start again right now, could Kidbrooke happen again, or what would you change? What would you improve?
That's a hard question to answer. I mean, look, could Kidbrooke happen again? Like I said, it's hard to balance out the need for housing for space, and I think it's a challenging thing to do. I think we need to, through development, really focus on that equilibrium of density versus open space and all that kind of stuff. It's hard to get right, but I think there is a way to get it right. Could it happen again in terms of like under my leadership, or yeah, I mean, we want to see, you know, the good thing about places like that is that you have Greenwich has a long partnership with Barclays, and Barclays has brought so much employment to the area. I think about 20,000 jobs to the area, number one, and they're really invested in creating space. If you go down to the Royal Arsenal, you see how beautiful that area is down there. You know, so potentially it could. I am very aware of different theories on development, you know, from the create streets theory to other theories. I don't know where I sit yet. I mean, I'm open to hearing feedback from all, number one. Ultimately, what I want to get to is good placemaking that houses people. We have to be realistic whilst also giving people the opportunity to live healthy lives.
Tell us to unpack a bit about what you're talking about around create streets and so on.
So,
just for our viewers.
The arguments about high density, medium density, and all of that kind of stuff. You know, there's different arguments out there. There's different arguments that talk about actually, look, high density is needed, and if we're going to solve the housing crisis because of the lack of land, but also arguments that will say high density is quite expensive to deliver, quite expensive to maintain. You can still achieve the amount of density you want on a very medium density and different things like that. So I do think there's different arguments out there. Number one, you know, I always love reading stuff that comes from the new London architecture, because you see a range of ways that people approach development and how people create development. So I'm open to hearing different thoughts. You know,
Do you want to go on some site visits? Are you inviting
I
yourself?
would love to go on some site. I would love to go on some site visits.
Yeah.
I would love to go on some site visits, but I don't think we should ever ignore the complexities around creating places. Development is constantly learning. I mean, if we look back to the 90s and then now and everything, you see the learning curve that is always happening in planning. You know, the outside city centres where you drive to the shopping centre and how that took away places from the high street. We're learning that now. We're coming back to the basics of actually how do we centre things around the town centre where people come together. That learning process should never stop in development. We will make mistakes, and it's also about learning from them to make sure we keep making good places.
Great stuff. And what you've just said, again, you're doing great segueing here, Anthony. You're leading us into the next section of the interview, which is around influences. And I want to know who or what events have most influenced how you look at growth and development and housing and planning and so on.
It's a really difficult question because I can't point to like a particular thing or person or development. I think it's mainly people and the challenges that face. So I remember walking down the street with a man, a friend, well, a Labour Party member, and he turned to me, and I was a councillor. I was vying to be a councillor at the time. And he turned to me and said, "Oh, isn't this Crossrail really terrible? That it's just made everywhere so unaffordable." And my reflections were, damn, like, you know, it's crazy that Crossrail coming to Woolwich has helped open up a new job market. It's helped bring new developments to the area. It's helped bring a population to the area, which means more demand for GP services, which means more funding for all of those kind of things. Because actually, if you have a growing population, you see movement in those areas. If a population is declining, you don't have those same benefits. And I thought to myself, wow, he's lived here all his life and he can't see the benefit of Crossrail. And so many within our communities fail to see how they benefit from development. And things like that inspire me to think about how I connect it, how I connect people's lives to the activities, the economic activities that are ongoing in our communities. So one of our things that we're trying to do is that we have a community wealth building strategy, but we are focused on how do we make sure that people benefit from economic activity in the borough or understand why it's important, number one. Number two, you know, I remember going and just visiting houses as a cabinet member and going into people's places where they live and seeing the conditions that they live in. Some people live in horrible conditions, and actually that for me inspires me to make sure, like I say, we're not about stopping development, we're about unlocking development to make sure that we can get good places for people to live, because actually the places that we live in are quite aged. You know, the places that we live in, the building fabric isn't able to contain the heat. You know, you can retrofit to a certain extent, but actually, are the U values going to keep escaping and all that kind of stuff? So we do have a focus and honest discussion about retrofitting and how it's done. And lastly, when I knock on the doors of communities who in new buildings that have recently been built, and you speak to the residents here and you say, yeah, we're a new family, we've had a baby. We never get to hear about the success of development. And all of that things joined together inspires me to continue, because there's always challenges in getting development done. But at the end, when it's done, go knock on a resident's door and listen to them and hear their story about where they've moved from, how they're creating a new home. And you know, that always reminds me of the need to keep going. And that's kind of the things that keep me pumping away and keep me wanting to unlock development, because we are creating communities of tomorrow, and we won't remember it when tomorrow comes. We'll just know that exists and this person lives there.
In terms of influences, what other council leaders do you admire?
Oh, it has to be Darren Rodwell, Barking and Dagenham. Love his gloves off approach to getting stuff done. I think he's an aspirational leader. I hope he makes it as MP. He has my full backing. You know, he lives and breathes Barking and Dagenham, and I absolutely love that about him. I think he's an inspirational leader and a mentor of mine.
You set up my next question, which is, would you aspire to follow him? You know, are you looking at the Houses of Parliament as a possible destination?
No. I'm not interested in it. I love local government. I love the fact we are the innovators. I really believe that local government are innovators, and we're on the ground and we get it. I feel quite restricted sometimes by national government. You know, if you look at the change that happens to right to buy receipts, national government was surprised how local government were using right to buy receipts in a very innovative way, and subject to that did changed the conditions around right to buy receipts because of local government lobbying. We are innovators and we can achieve so much. To be able to lead that and to be able to be a council leader, I think that's more interesting than sitting on a green bench. I have no interest in being in Parliament. I love Greenwich. This is where I want to be, and I love housing, and I love the housing market, and I think it's great to be a leader who's able to help create the place of tomorrow, and that's what my interest is, and that lies at the heart of local government.
How long do you think that's interesting for? How all other things being equal, and given the opportunity by the people of Greenwich, how long would you like to stay as leader, stay as a councillor?
Well, I've always been advised, prepare for your prepare for your exit from politics as much as you prepare for your entry into politics. So I'm not going to speculate. I am just going to be humble and note that I sit on this seat for a period of time. But whilst I'm doing it, I'm going to be the best me. I'm going to have lots of fun. I'm going to be deeply passionate and poetic about it. And I'm going to work bloody hard.
I almost think you were a politician in your responses there, Anthony.
Nah, not at all. But yeah, I am a politician.
Let's talk a bit about your entry into the political world. Tell me, I want to ask you about your watershed moments. You know, what are the moments in your life and career that have led you here today to become leader of Greenwich Council? And those may be many and multifaceted. I'm interested to hear your take.
The other day, I sat down and gave a talk about being a politician that is learning, a learning leader, one that is maturing over time. You know, who I am in 2018 is very different from who I am now. I remember sitting in my uni accommodation watching Woolwich burn because the London riots had happened as a result of the killing of Mark Duggan. And when I went on TV, I saw that lots of the politicians were not speaking of my experiences. They didn't acknowledge the difficulty about where I live and how that has shaped me and what education I had, and the constraints your environment has on what your abilities are to achieve. That inspired me to get into politics. It inspired me to get into politics because I wanted to be able to speak about my lived experience. I wanted to be able to speak about the challenges of growing up in an area that lacked that had poverty and deprivation. I wanted to speak about the lack of investment in education and innovation in education. So that brought me into politics. But since then, I've grown. I've grown, and I'm learning, and I'm enjoying maturing over time. You know, I've never lived in social housing. I've always lived in one home, which I live in today, my parents' home. And to get elected in 2018 and see kids have to move houses several times in a year, I think to myself, gosh, how would I have survived as a child and had academic success if I had gone through that? To see councillors in Greenwich who are elected moving because they live in the private rented sector, because there's no fault evictions are continue to be done. To see them go through that experience and think about how they're having to always move and there's no security in their lives, that's difficult. And over that time, I've really matured and really understood that actually housing is fundamentally, if you get housing right, it's almost Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you get shelter right, that is the thing that allows people to progress in life and have good welfare. And it always comes back to that for me. So it's an area I've almost grown an interest in, but really matured in, because actually we need all tenure types. We need everyone building, we need communities building, we need community benefit societies building, we need the church building, because it's such a tough gig. And we all have to join our forces to make sure that people have a platform for which they can be a springboard to having a better life.
And you mentioned university. Where did you go and what did you read?
So I went to Coventry, I did civil engineering.
Okay, and has that led at all to any kind of career choices, that decision to read engineering?
So I love construction, absolutely love construction. And when I finished my degree, I was like, okay, I'm going to do politics for a little bit. But then I started doing politics for a little bit. Then I thought, oh, I missed a bit of construction for a little bit. And that's why I worked within planning consultation, and then started to undertake my master's, because actually I want to be technical. I desire and love the theory around development. I love construction. I'm interested in all parts of it, from the local authority level right down to delivery, to planning, to creating place and space and people, and how development makes you feel. So it's an area that I'm still exploring.
Well, you've got Meridian Homes. You own it as a borough. Are you on site all the time, sort of playing with machines?
Let's say that, you know, when you become council leader, you have much other things to focus on. And I have to definitely do the job from the perspective of all sectors of a cabinet. But yeah, look, I'm always out looking at the stuff that they're delivering, and enjoy having the conversations about how we progress Greenwich, how we change Greenwich, how we unlock, you know, the focused discussions that are happening at the moment around our campaign for the DLR from Beckton to Thamesmead is a great discussion. Working in partnership with, to envision that with Peabody and about the Thamesmead opportunity, Thamesmead Abbeywood opportunity area, and the vision of tomorrow of having a sustainable community. You know, it's inspiring conversations. And when established, we might not be here anymore, you know. However, knowing that you can help contribute to that is quite exciting.
And I'm assuming that you grew up and currently live in Greenwich. That's where your parents' house is and your house. So is there anything from your childhood in Greenwich, from your long time in the borough, is there anything that's changed that you miss? What are the aspects of Greenwich from when you were growing up that you sort of miss, that you remember fondly and wish they were still part of the borough?
Actually, I think it's the part that inspired me is the things that have gone. So where I grew up, you had Woolwich, which, you know, you had a little fountain in Woolwich, and it was always quite messy. It attracted the wrong types of people, there are lots of antisocial behavior. And now you see General Gordon Square with a TV, and every time there's a World Cup, you have whole crowds around that area. That's the power of change and placemaking. That's the power of development. You now have a space that the community has a sense of pride about and a sense of ownership about. Actually, that fountain, I never felt like I owned it. I never felt like I could go enjoy myself and relax. But now I do. Now we have this wonderful square that brings people together around a sports activity. Is great. So the changes that I've seen development-wise have changed our lives for the better. And that's what I want to enable.
Brilliant. And that's a lovely segue again into the final part of our interview, Anthony, which is to ask you what you do when you're not working, you know, when you're not being leader of Greenwich. And I know you're a politician and it's a 24/7, 7 days a week career. But what are the kind of private interests, the passions and interests that really sort of drive you, get you out of bed?
So when I'm not looking at my phone to see what the latest panic email has come in, I'm really just out with friends, trying to catch up with my friends, because I really value going around to my friend's house to just eat and chill and, you know, make merry and fellowship and all of that kind of stuff. I'm an activities kind of guy, like pottery, do love a bit of clay painting and stuff like that. I'm quite competitive, so bowling, I'm a good shot. I do a bit of darts too, and I'm in a darts team. So stuff like that I like to do. and yeah, just general going out with friends and spending time with family. I think the one thing that I miss from having a career in local government is the amount of time you give over to your job. And I think for me, I try to do as much as I can to invest time back into spending with family and my nephews, because ultimately they're the people that don't see me that much. So when I can enjoy that opportunity, I make sure I take it. I'm kind of in a really fortunate position that I don't have kids at the moment, and I don't have those kind of responsibilities. So I do spend a lot of time with work, but I am trying to give more back to family, watching my parents grow old and being there with them. It's really important.
So you mentioned pottery. Have you got any of your pottery to hand?
Yeah, not here, but at home.
Okay, at home, but no, there's nothing on your desk that you can show us.
No, not.
Oh, what a shame.
I will tell you though, I am quite like I like making things with my hands. And when I first left college, I wanted to be a blacksmith, and I went and did some time at Surrey Docks Farm training to be a blacksmith. So I'm very much hands-on, kind of like making things with my hands kind of person.
How would your friends describe you, do you think?
Oh, mad. Absolutely mad. Because there's just such a range in my personality. You know, I go from really liking to have fun to really focused and serious about work, and quite out there, but sometimes reserved and quite reflective. So I don't think there's one word to describe me as. I think they'll just think, yeah, they just probably think I'm a bit crazy. But which person isn't mad to go into politics?
Yeah. Well, what parts of your work push you out of your comfort zone? What are you kind of least comfortable about in your role as leader, as councillor?
Oh, I don't approach things. I guess I don't approach things in that way. I enjoy new challenges. I enjoy learning, and therefore, I'm someone who's attracted to challenges and things that are quite put into too difficult box. So I don't think there's nothing there that I feel uncomfortable about. I guess the one thing I do feel uncomfortable is about letting people down. I don't want to let anybody down. And that's quite hard to do sometimes. But as long as I know I'm doing the right thing to get to the right answers, then I'm good. But I relish challenges.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because in politics, you almost have to let someone down. It's a bit like being a football manager, right? You can't pick everyone for the team, and you can't please everyone all the time as a politician. So how do you manage that kind of dissonance in your own kind of sense of satisfaction and well-being?
So when I say let people down, I think it's important to have clarity on the part about what am I trying to achieve and the outcomes. You know, if I will not be letting people down if I get more people walking and cycling, because it impacts and grows people's health. You know, and so if I'm letting people down who want to take their car 5 minutes down the road, I am fully embedded in what I'm trying to achieve and the outcomes of what we're trying to do with our policies that we've established. So for me, when I say not letting people down, is when I look back and people ask me, how did you work towards this aim and outcome? Because that aim and outcome is important for a reason. It's to preserve and promote life. And therefore, I want to be able to answer that. Not say, actually, I faltered at the time because ultimately I couldn't get through, I couldn't ride out the frustration or the protest that came. And that's quite challenging, but I'm entirely geared to achieving those outcomes that we have set out.
And is that how you measure success? I mean, when you sort of sit back, how do you look at what you're trying to achieve and say, right, that's worked, or that hasn't worked, or I've done a good job?
So it's focused on, number one, how are we meeting our outcomes? Like for instance, on the 26th of October, our transport strategy is going to be achieved. That's one stage. Now the implementation of it. And it's all about health. It's all about the health and well-being of our residents. It's all about getting people using more sustainable transport means. And if we can achieve that, then I am achieving what I've set out to do.
So your measurements of success are all embodied in what the council is setting out. You feel that the council reflects what you're trying to achieve?
So I think it reflects, number one, the overall strategy. So if I can achieve that, then the biggest thing that I need to do is connecting people to that and being an example and the conduit. So it's relating those strategies to people's lives. How can I get the buy-in from our residents? And that's maintaining dialogue all the time. So it's taking people on that journey. So yes, we have our outcomes that we want to achieve, but also how we connect our communities to those outcomes. If you look at our corporate plan that's going to be coming out, it's going to be outcome-led, data-led, and actually it's going back and saying, actually, guys, this is what we're doing. Here's how we're changing the future of our children. So it's all interconnected in that way, and making sure that we're visibly on the ground, telling people the why, telling people the story, and making people understand why it's important to do that.
That's really eloquent, Anthony. I'm going to ask you one final question. I promise it's a final question. What advice would you give to anyone entering local politics?
Oh, don't write anybody off. Be open to having conversations. Be slow to judgment of people, and listen as much as you can, and read as much as you can.
Anthony, on that note, we're going to end the interview. Oh, go ahead. You wanted to finish?
I wanted to talk about SIL.
Please, go ahead.
Very lastly, we are looking at SIL and an uplift.
Sorry, for any viewers' benefit, this is Community Infrastructure Levy, yeah?
So we are going to be looking at SIL. We will have a paper coming out very soon on it, and looks at uplifting rates. It's not going to be done in a vicious way that makes development unviable, and obviously it has to be subject to the inspector, the planning inspector, who's going to agree it. So I don't think, I think it's in line with where we need to be in terms of a review, and I don't see what we're uplifting it to being a threat to development.
You remembered that I asked you that question earlier. I forgot, but you
remembered. No, it's fine. It's because I know there's uncertainty around it. Yeah. But you know, we do need to make sure that there is a real equilibrium. I don't want to uplift. It probably won't even be approved if I did try and uplift SIL. You know, there's so many things to consider there about viability, and what we don't want to do is halt development. But we equally need our fair share so that we can invest back into infrastructure.
Anthony, thank you very much indeed. On that note, we're going to end the interview, and please accept my warmest thanks for taking part. Viewers, our voice of authority, the leader of the Royal Borough of Greenwich, Councillor Anthony Okereke. And as the virtual applause rings out across the internet, I'll thank you, viewers, for sparing the time to tune in and learn about the man shaping the vision for Greenwich. And we're going to be back on Thursday at midday with Style Homes and guests from Redbridge Council and Community-Led Housing London to discuss applying modern methods of construction to community-led development. And details for that are in the chat and at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. So until then, from our Voice of Authority, Councillor Anthony Okereke, from Carter Jonas and Gia Lee and Haptic Architects and London Square Partners, and from me and from everyone at 3 Fox. Good afternoon.